So I get asked all the time, what is your favorite lure? And if you followed my career at all, follow me fishing, watch me on the BPT, watch me basically anytime fishing, it seems like I'm always throwing a bladed jig. So by far, if there's one lure out there that every person should learn and they should always have tied on, it's a bladed jig. Bladed jig to me is one of the most versatile baits ever invented. I've never seen a bait that's so good in every type of climate condition, water temperature, water color, different types of cover, structure, everything. The bait literally catches fish all year long under so many different circumstances, catches big fish, catches numbers, and it's just a phenomenal bait. So there's a lot of options when it comes to a bladed jig, and I'm going to share with you the ones that I throw. To me, these are by far the best. These are the ones you hear about most of the pros throwing. And you know, there's some other baits out there, but I'm not going to talk about those. I'm just going to talk about the ones that work for me. First and foremost, the bait that is by far the number one bait out there is the jackhammer. The jackhammer is a bait that's been around for quite a few years, and you know, it's from chatterbait, or you know, it's a bait that's kind of been a reinvented version of the chatterbait, and a phenomenal bait. It's a top quality bait. It catches tons of fish and it catches big fish as well. The other two baits that I'm really fond of is the Strike King Thunder Cricket. This is a very, very effective bait. This is actually what I caught my biggest bass in my life on a few years back, on 11.3. And then, you know, the last but not least is the Bass Pro Shops. This is a new bait that's just come out, is the Bass Pro Shops Chatterbomb. And this is another bait made by the Chatterbait brand, but it's a Bass Pro licensed bait, and as you can see, they make some wonderful colors in it as well, and a great bladed jig to add to the arsenal as well. So when it comes to bladed jigs, it's you know, where do you start? So let's look at colors. I think that's what makes this bait such a versatile bait. Actually, it's the different ways you can fish it, but a big part of that is the colors. And you know, we always hear about matching the hatch, and I think that's what makes this bait so effective, is because it sets up for every type of situation. Matching the hatch means, you know, here I've got a couple tied on here. Obviously, these are, you know, your translucent or shad colors, so your bait fish colors. So it's a very effective wet bait like that. You can fish it high in the water column or whatever depth that the bait fish might be, or then you can get into your green pumpkins, you know, good clear water, but crawfish imitators as well. Here's a bait that is very, very effective early in the year. You know, reds are such an effective bait, so another great crawfish match. This one is obviously a bluegill color, but still has crawfish colors as well, so very effective. But then last but not least is a black and blue. Anybody in the south that fishes tannic waters or natural lakes up north, black and blue is probably a super, you know, one of the best colors as well. So, you know, that's one of the things that makes a bladed jig so effective, is the colors and the ability to match the hatch of different prey that the bass feed on. The other thing is the sizes of it. You know, the most common are a 3/8 and half. But you know, some of the brands, you know, the Thunder Crickets, they'll come in a 5/8 and 3/4 also, and then the jackhammers actually come in a 3/4 and even an 1 1/4 ounce as well. So they're baits that you can fish as shallow. You know, a 3/8 I would say 0 to 5, maybe 6 foot, somewhere in there, and then the 1/2 ounce probably 3 to, I don't know, 8, somewhere in there, depending on how fast or slow I want to fish it. And then, you know, even going to these big 3/4 and even 1 1/4 ounce baits, even for deeper situations. So the bigger weights are very effective as well. And even now, there's some of the baits that have bigger blades as well. But you know, these are kind of the basics. These are what I throw in and day out. The other big part of bladed jigs is the trailer. And you know, typically, I think the #1 trailer, that probably the most popular by far, is the Yamamoto Zako, or Zako, however you pronounce it. Another new bait that's very similar to that and a lot more cost effective is the Zoom. This is the Shimmer Shad. That's a great bait. Bait that I really like is Hog Farmer. This is a 4.5 inch spunk shad. And last but not least is the Strike King Menace. This is a great trailer as well. It's just got a little swimming action. But one of the things I see people making the mistake on is they throw a lot of trailers that create drag in the water. And what I mean like that, a lot of people like to use like a swim bait trailer, like a boot tail. And what that does is a boot tail trailer creates a lot of resistance in the water, which takes away the vibration of the blade itself. And I feel like that's a hindrance and helps or creates it where people don't get as many bites. So I believe a straight tail, some form of a straight tail trailer is the most effective way to go on those. You know, even the Menace creates just a real subtle action as well. So a great action as well there. But so don't throw something that creates a lot of drag in the water, because I think that takes away a lot of your effectiveness for the blades themselves. So that's the great thing. You can match the hatch. You can match the color of the bait with you know, colors that compare well with the baits, or you can add something. If you want to add some crazy colors to your bait to make them even brighter, you can do something like that as well. So I think that's another thing that makes the bladed jig so well, is how you can match it and mix it up with different trailers. So another thing that makes this bait so versatile and so effective is just the different scenarios that you can fish it in. What first comes to mind is all my experience fishing down south, especially in Florida, lakes that are full of vegetation. That's where they've probably become most popular. Hydrilla, milfoil, phenomenal in lily pads. I mean, I look back at a couple events here earlier this year, Toledo Bend fishing hydrilla. It's a phenomenal bait to just work through the hydrilla. It's really good at just catching the hydrilla, but it won't completely ball up. You pop it and then it pops out of there, makes an erratic action, and that's what causes a lot of your reaction strikes at times. Another one that comes to mind, Santee Cooper. I was fishing it through pad stems. It goes through pad stems very, very well and effective, and a great way to catch them there as well. Milfoil, you know, any kind of vegetation is where it's super effective. On the board.
Yes, sir.
How about that? Beauty. Good?
Yes, sir.
Four. All right. Good way to start the day. Right here. That's the setup. Old bladed jig and some of the other events that come to mind, Lake Travis. We had an event at Lake Travis, and you know, deep, clear, rocky lake, and you know, I was fishing shad-colored baits. You know, fishing around the shad spawn and stuff, and you know, fishing that thing high in the water column and just fishing it. You know, you can fish it in 6 inches of water. The bait works really well, but you can slow roll that thing, keep it in contact with just above the rocks, or keep it high. However you feel like the bait fish, or whatever the bait fish are doing, you can mimic that and draw strikes as well. You know, this color comes to mind. Another big thing that's coming right around the corner are brim beds and fishing around the brim spawn and all that. And you know, you can mimic brim. You know, got a great color here. You can fish around those brim beds, no matter if they're in vegetation or on rocks or whatever. A great setup for that as well. Another big thing is how you can fish this bait. You can fish it super fast. One of the ways I love to fish this bait, and that I think it makes it so effective, is you can skip this bait probably better than, the only other thing I know that you can skip as good as this would be like a wacky stick worm on a spinning rod. But as far as on a casting rod, probably the only things that come to mind that you can skip as good as this would probably be a swim jig or a frog or something like that. So I can skip this thing way up under docks where you can't get many other moving baits, and just crawl this thing around or fish it right up under the floats on a dock. I've caught some tremendous bags of fish that way. Another thing I love about it is it catches all three species. It's obviously great for largemouth, but I've caught good spotted bass on it, and I've caught smallmouth as well, even up north. So great on all three species. Another great thing about this bait is if you're a beginner a weekend angler or a professional like myself, it's super easy to fish. I mean, if you're new to fishing, this is probably one of the first baits I would recommend getting, because you can take this thing, throw it out there and reel it in, and you're going to catch fish. You don't have to work it some crazy way or have some erratic action to it to catch fish. So if you're a beginner, definitely this is one of the very first baits you want to have. But if you're a professional like myself, this should be in your tied on a rod every single time as well. So another thing that makes this bait so effective is the bigger sizes that you can get into. Big 3/4 ounce size here. So if the fish are out deeper, more summertime, you can fish some baits out deep. This bait right here comes to mind because we had an MLF team event. Myself, James Elam, and Jonathan Van Dam. We were up in Minnesota, and we were catching a lot of fish up shallow, but those fish got a lot of pressure, so we just kept backing out into the deeper water and putting on bigger baits. And where we were catching fish up in that 2 to 6, 7 foot range, backed out in that 10, 12, 15 foot of water, can throw this big one out there. It sinks down really good and work it out in those deeper depths as well, cover a lot of water and still catch a lot of big fish as well. So next on the list, we've talked about the baits and how effective the baits are, but here's the other big part of this. I hear a lot of people talk about they lose a lot of fish on a bladed jig, and I can tell you right there, if you're losing a lot of fish on a bladed jig, it's because you're not using the right setup. And I've spent a lot of time experimenting on the right setups to use. And I was proud to partner a few years back with Cast King, and we actually have a technique specific rod. This is the Cast King Speed Demon Pro. This is the 7.3 bladed jig rod. This is a medium action rod, and super effective for a bladed jig. And what's really important on a good bladed jig rod is a good soft tip. Like I said, medium heavy action. You don't want a heavy action stiff rod that you might flip a jig or something on, because there's no give there. When you're working this bait and it's swimming along, you can feel those fish, and I believe with a stiff rod, people tend to jerk the bait away from them instead of allowing those fish to really engulf the bait. So the soft tip's really crucial for that, but then also the soft tip too is they eat the bait good. You got a good strong backbone to get a good hook set, but then when the fish is fighting, that soft tip gives some give, so those fish aren't able to get away. Another rod that I absolutely love, and the 7.3 is great for closer tight end fishing. It's great in around cypress trees or docks or something like that. But if I get into more open water, Florida, I'm making long casts or rocky banks or whatever, this is another rod from Cast King. This is a Speed Demon Pro, but this is a 7.6 swim bait rod, but this is a phenomenal bladed jig rod. It's basically the same action as the bladed jig rod, but it's medium heavy action rod, but it's still got that same soft tip to it. So the tip is the key there, a soft tip. Next on the list that's super important is line. Line is what's attached to the bait, but when I first started fishing a bladed jig and had mixed results with it, I was trying to throw it on braid, and it's awesome to feel what a bladed jig feels like on braid, and when they eat it, I mean, it's just, you've got the advantage having braid, but I can promise you, if you throw it on fluorocarbon, you're going to get a lot more bites. And what fluorocarbon? From what I can tell people, the average is somewhere in that 14 to 17 pound, depending on what kind you use. I use 99% of the time you use 16-pound gamma fluorocarbon. I love that. It's the most phenomenal strong line, and it's what I use 99% of the time. I am experimenting a little bit more with, you can see I got 17 on here, but that's actually the 16-pound gamma fluorocarbon. But I am experimenting a little bit if I want to fish the bait a little bit deeper with 14-pound as well. So somewhere in that 14 to 17 pound fluorocarbon line is the real critical part. But last but not least is the reel. And the reel is very, very important. And I like to mention my late buddy Aaron Martins, but one thing I loved about Aaron, he was very technical, and he taught me a lot about fishing. And as I was new to a bladed jig, I started out fishing it on the same reel. It was a Bassinator Elite, but it was a 6:4 to 1 gear ratio reel. And if you're new to it, that's a great reel to use because you can really feel the action of the bait. That slower gear ratio really lets you feel the vibration of that bait and let you know what that bait's doing. But Aaron told me, he's like, bro, you're going to lose some fish on that reel. I'm like, you're overthinking it. I'm not going to lose any fish. Well, fast forward 6 months or a year, whatever it was, here we were at Lake Fork for one of our BPT events, and I'm throwing probably I think a half-ounce chatterbait or thunder cricket or something like that, probably in a red crawfish color, because it was early in the year. I'm fishing over the hydrilla, making long casts with it, and I throw out there and I catch like a 5-pounder. We put it on the scales, weigh it. I'm super excited because it's getting late in the day, and I'm in the cut doing pretty well. And luckily this fish didn't cost me. Just a couple casts later, I fire away out there, make a couple turns to the handle, and another big one engulfs this bait, but it comes screaming right at me. And with that slow reel, I could not catch up to it. I'm just watching my line swim towards the boat, and I'm reeling. I finally just get up the slack, and it's like the fish is like, well, I've had that in my mouth long enough, and spit it back at me, and I lost the fish. And I saw it, and it was another 5 to 7 pounder. So luckily it didn't hurt me, but it was still hurtful whenever you lose a big fish. And I was a little hard-headed. I didn't make the adjustment at that time. Made the cut, went down to Lake Athens, and it was a day or two later, and the same scenario almost happened to a T, but this time it cost me. I catch like a 4 or 5 pounder, and a few casts later had the same thing happen, had another big fish bite, came screaming right at me, and I lost it. And I think I finished maybe 3rd or 4th in that event. That fish probably cost me a place or two and several $1,000s as well. So at that point, I'm like, I remember what my buddy Aaron told me. I'm like, I got to use a faster reel. So I switched to the same reel, the Cast King Bassinator Elite, but in an 8-to-1 gear ratio reel. I found this 8-to-1 is a phenomenal reel for it because it's just the perfect reel for speed and the feel and the power of what that reel would have. And now when those big fish bite it, that 8-to-1, I've got enough gear ratio to be able to catch those fish and they not get off as well. So the reel is another super important part of this setup for catching and landing a lot of big fish. So there it is. If you're going bass fishing, you need to have a bladed jig tied on them, whether you're in a boat, on a bank, at a pond, or in a big lake. To have one tied on, I fished from New York to Florida to Texas and everywhere in between. Deep, shallow, clear, muddy, a bladed jig catches fish in any given condition.